Welcome to We the Waste People, where two Southern metalheads, a Gen Xer and an elder millennial, break down class politics and share what it's like to be working class leftist in the heart of Dixie.
Over the course of this podcast, you can expect some real and probably uncomfortable conversation about the cultural left, a look at the topics and headlines directly impacting the South, and class discussions where we review and discuss a text or video related to class history and politics. Yes, we hope to educate while we yak about our passion.
Up first in the class discussion series, we're starting with the book, White Trash, the 400-year untold history of class in America, an essential text for all working class whites and especially for those caught up in MAGA and looking for an off ramp.
And finally, we'll end each show with our favorite and probably the most important segment, Why We Can't Have Nice Things, which is where we spotlight one absurdly rich oligarch and remind you who's hoarding all the wealth.
I'm John Brown,
And I'm Butterfly Screams.
and this is We the Waste People podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Okay.
So, this is our very first episode, and as we mentioned in the intro, John and I are both Southern metalheads. We actually only recently met a few months ago. We bumped into each other on a channel in the Sons of Liberty Discord server. John asked me if my name, Butterfly Screams, was related to a song written by the best sludge metal band that ever lived. If you know, you know. And the rest is history. And here we are now, continuing the use of our SOL names. Don't be surprised if and when our chats veer off into the world of heavy metal music, because that's a strong possibility. But for the time being, the main point of this podcast is mostly to bring attention to the real threat facing this country, which is the ruling elite class. Not only will we be talking leftist politics, but we'll literally be getting to know each other in the process. This could go really great or it could be a disaster. Um, just stick around and we'll find out, dear listeners. Well, so I guess we should introduce ourselves and give a little bit about our backgrounds and how we ended up on the left. John, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Where do I begin? So let's start with my childhood or my family growing up. So I'm a Southern transplant. Grew up mostly in the South. Starting at about age 2, my mom moved myself and my kid brother down here, um, and met the guy I called dad shortly after. Then a couple years into that, we moved out to Texas. We lived in Texas. Oh man, I know we were in Texas in '80 because that's when my youngest brother was born. Um, and then in '80, I believe it was '86 or '88. Good Lord, my memory sucks. '86 or '88, we moved from Texas back to Mississippi. Moved around a lot when I was a kid growing up. My parents could not decide whether they wanted to make it work or not. On again, off again. Was I moved around a lot, went to a lot of different schools. But again, mostly in the mid South, or mostly in the South, mid South rather. And again, too many schools to count. On paper, I should be by all metrics MAGA. I'm pushing 50. I'm an I don't mean uneducated and there's no school, but I mean no. I didn't go to college of any kind, no trade schools. I just when I got out of high school, I pretty much just went out and started working. And that led me to become a jack of many trades and a master of none. Um, and how did I move to the left? It's been a long journey to the left for me. I would say for the most part, I didn't even consider left or right. Man, when did I really start thinking left or right? Probably about, man, I guess probably 2008ish, somewhere in there. But even then, I still struggled with the whole left right thing. I'll be honest, I still struggle with that period, right? But when I was
Interesting.
a kid, I had a babysitter when I was like 8 years old, a lady by the name of O.C. Williams, excuse me, who was in a neighborhood that was pretty, I guess what people would consider the projects or the hood in Texas. For the town we lived in, city we lived in, it was definitely um, a poor working class black community for the most part. Um, and eventually we wound up, my mom and my kid brother and I, in one of the many splits my dad and she had, wound up moving into that neighborhood for a while. Um, there were just multiple different instances. Then again, people that I've known, uh, and I would say 9/11 and 24/7 news started moving me further to the left. And then in 2004, I started working for a large pawn shop company, and did pawn was a pawnbroker for about 12 years. So yeah, all those things played into it. And now here I am trying to figure out where I guess on the left I fit, and I don't have an answer.
Huh. That's really cool. I'm actually kind of relieved to hear you say that. I know when we first started talking, I kind of shared with you how I'm sort of going through my own little leftist political identity crisis. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to kind of get to know each other and work through some things in the process as far as, figuring out, how we feel and where we fit. So, was that all that you wanted to say about?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, there's people like I said, I've got friends that I've met along the way. There was an instance when I was, man, we lived in West Memphis at the time. My mom had moved us out there. She was dating at the time, and a guy that she knew through the guy she was dating. I guess it was his brother, actually. I'll never forget hearing some not so nice comments about, a about Janet Jackson and how she was the exception to a certain rule he had. And that, I was like, why is that the exception? What's so different about that person compared to any other person of color? And then in high school, I met a guy by the name of Tom, and spent a lot of time with Tom in Midtown Memphis and getting to know people of, just different backgrounds and culture there, outside of the small town that I graduated high school in, which was, man, the Bible Belt. There's probably a church on every block and a half. You can't drive more than a block and a half without seeing a church. Sometimes you'll see three churches on the same block. Um, but yeah, I would say that's about it.
yeah, yeah, churches everywhere sounds about like where I grew up. There was literally one at the end of the street that I lived on, and then you could turn the corner and there were two more, like not even a half a mile away from each other. Like, yeah, they were everywhere. So definitely relate to that. Um, so for me, I grew up in a working class family. Neither of my parents went to college, and I don't even think my dad graduated from high school. He was an alcoholic, unfortunately, and that he probably had some neurodivergence going on, which I think is probably why he drank. But that's a story for another day. My mom, she was the rock. She held it down for the whole family. She often worked two jobs when needed. She always made more money than my dad, and she did her very best to keep life as normal as possible for me and my sister. Um, Overall, it was a pretty mixed bag of good and bad times, but I'm super proud of my mom's strengths. She was awesome. After graduating high school, I managed to go to college on student loans and a state scholarship. I got an undergraduate degree in anthropology, and while it's an interesting subject, very interesting, it's pretty useless unless you have an advanced degree. Um, and I did not feel like I was smart enough at the time, so I decided that I would try and get a full time job working at the library where I worked as a student worker. I absolutely loved working in the library, and thankfully that panned out shortly after I graduated from undergrad. Excuse me. Um, So I spent the next decade working in various support roles. I mainly helped professors and students obtain materials they needed for their research or their schoolwork. Turns out having a bachelor's degree and working at a Research One university didn't shield me from crap wages. So by 2014, I decided to go for a master's in library and information science in hopes of landing a higher paying professional level job. Um, that worked out too, but by 2022, the snotty elitist culture of academia was really wearing on me. Um, and around this time, I received an autism diagnosis. And that was actually really affirming of where or of why I never felt like I fit in academia. So it was apparent to me that something needed to change. Um, I have always been a political junkie and pretty much knew that Trump was going to be reelected. So I decided to do something completely different. And that's when I decided to pursue my dreams of living in the country and becoming more self reliant and to be just closer to nature. And so, as for how I ended up on the left, I became politically conscious as a freshman in college shortly before the war in Iraq in 2003. I considered myself a standard liberal Democrat until I realized how corporate captured the party is. Like a lot of other center left lefties, I was all in for Bernie when he ran back in 2016. And then I remained a diehard supporter of his through 2020. But like I said earlier, I'm now suffering from a leftist political identity crisis. Trump 2.0 has had me learning a lot of leftist political theory and reflecting on what is passed for, quote, left since I became politically conscious. I'm so far left now that I find myself overlapping with some traditionally conservative right wing views. But what keeps me firmly on the left is my desire to see something other than an elite capitalist class dictating our economic and social livelihoods. Most importantly, I've come to the conclusion that the left has strayed too far away from class politics and analysis. The notion of equality has been abandoned and replaced with equity, which shifts the focus from a political responsibility to ensure fairness in a democratic system to an economic one. In other words, equal access to upward financial mobility in a capitalist system trumps the importance of the principle of equal decision making power as citizens. It presupposes that capitalism is the best and only economic system. So therefore, let's not question it. Let's just make sure everyone has equal access to it. Um, and I feel like we also need to dissect and recognize all the ways that the ruling class has co opted leftist movements since FDR and the ways they've pitted us against one another by removing class analysis from the equation. Anyway, I could go on all day about why I'm on the left, how I got here, but hopefully these things are things we can unpack along the way. Um, yeah. So, do you have any hopes or goals for our podcast, John?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely hope to just reach an audience of people who might be like we are, who don't know exactly where they fit on the left, but consider them left, consider themselves left. Maybe to reach some independence, or even maybe some folks who might
Yes.
consider themselves on the right because they don't know what the left is, other than what the corporate media tells them, and especially these days where you hear people in on the right in politics talking about, lunatic left, socialist. Uh, they call us all kinds of names, but let's see. Yeah, they don't really ever explain what those things are, right? And I
Yeah, they
think
just
through
they just make it a boogeyman.
Yeah, yeah, just one big boogeyman. And unfortunately that works. Um, so I just, I want to just talk this through, and help people, beyond our little reach. Hopefully, we reach out to a lot more people and help people understand that the biggest issues in our country, is, not just unchecked capitalism, but the greedy elites who keep us fighting amongst ourselves over all the different things they keep us fighting over. so that we're looking at each other instead of looking up.
Amen, brother. Amen. Amen. Okay, so before we jump into the book for our class discussion segment, I thought it might be fun for us to do like a rapid fire Q&A that'll give listeners an idea of where we currently stand. So I'll go first. John, have you ever been called a communist?
No, nope.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought about this. I was like, I don't think I've ever directly been called a communist, but I think people probably just assume it about me. But no one's ever said, "Oh, you dirty commie" or anything like that. So,
Yeah.
um,
Again, I think that's,
anyway,
I think the problem there is that people don't really, the vast majority of people, let me say it that way. And again, that's that our education system, because of, the class warfare, they've done everything they can to strip education, make it just enough. But people don't know what communist is. They don't know what socialist is. They don't know the differences. They don't know the similarities. So,
so true. That's so true. All right. Well, would you eat the rich if it came down to it?
oh yeah, I would.
Hell yeah, that's right. I would
I'd eat
too.
the rich before I ate my dogs or my cats.
Amen. I very much so. All right. Do you think the billionaires should, or excuse me, do you think billionaires should exist at all?
No, man, billionaire. I don't. Why? Why is there a need? I mean, I've heard it said elsewhere and by other people. Let's give them a cap. I'm not saying people shouldn't have the right to become wealthy in some shape or form, but at some point, you've won. You won capitalism.
Right. Right. I totally agree. I mean, there's just only so much money you can spend, only so much money you can have in a single lifetime. So, and not only that, I honestly feel like there's got to be a level of wealth that you get to, and like it like switches on a psychopathic gene or something. Like it just, you just lose all touch with reality. You lose your ability to empathize. You just, it, yeah, that's just a theory I have, but yeah, I would say I don't think they should exist. I don't. Um so, have you ever been kicked off of Facebook for a spicy take?
No, I have not. I have lost friends from takes on Facebook. I actually, right. I mean, literally, like the day after the election, this last election, I completely shut my account off. Like it's not just paused, it's not just in sleep mode. I deleted everything. You will not find it anymore.
Yeah.
What about
Yeah.
yourself? Have you been kicked off?
I have never been kicked off. I quit putting my political views out there. I don't know, probably sometime around 2020ish. And we'll get into more detail about why that is later on through the podcast. It was at the height of like all the George Floyd stuff, and it was it was just a really rough time. And I came away from the whole thing and just decided no more. I'm not putting that out there. And not only do I not put like my political stuff out there anymore, I just don't ever put myself out there. Like I still have a Facebook account, but it's like I don't exist. Like I just, I'm more of a lurker, I guess you could say.
I understand.
Um, so yeah, and also I've also lost friends over my spicy takes. That's for sure. So, do you believe in mutual aid over charity?
I've never really considered it, but on the spot with a quick answer, I would say yeah. I think mutual aid is far better than charity, because you have to ask yourself, why is there a need for charity, especially in a country that is so called the richest country on earth. We're the richest country on earth, but we probably have, I would say, probably on par with any other country, if not more poor people, that need the charity, and they shouldn't need the charity in a country that is supposedly the richest.
Yeah, Oh yeah, totally. And also, I don't know why, but I see the word charity and I just immediately think of like churches, and I just can't. I'm sure there are other charity organizations that are not religiously affiliated, but I just feel like historically, traditionally, charity has most come from like religious organizations, and that's just problematic to say the least. But so yeah, I think my answer would be definitely mutual aid.
Yeah, so when I was,
So
sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. I was going to move on to the next question.
Oh, I was just gonna add that, back in my time as a pawnbroker for the large corporate pawn shop, they got into because of the COO's, something with the COO's life. They got into a charity fundraising thing that we did yearly around diabetes. Um, and they set these goals, and you had to come up with ways to try to raise the money, and it became less about charity and more about ways to just get people to give one way or the other, right? And they made it into
Hmm.
stupid contests. And then, shortly thereafter, leaving corporate pawn world, I found out that all these companies, all these corporations that are asking you for money for charity, they get to take the money that everyone's donated and they get to write that off. Another big tax loophole.
Oh yeah, that's that, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought of that, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, mutual aid any day for sure. So, have you voted for someone you now regret?
No, 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 I've never voted for anyone I regret. Um, I look back. If I regret anything about voting, it was that I wasn't more active at the local level sooner. Um,
Hmm.
you know, before, man, I tell you, when I first started voting, I literally was that person that was like, I'm voting for the person, not the letter beside their name. I voted for Republicans and Democrats alike, just who I thought was going to be the best candidate. One of my earliest votes was for Mitch McConnell for governor of Indiana. I had moved up there at the time. And I'll be honest, he didn't, from what I can remember, he didn't have a whole lot of politics about people's personal life at that time. The one thing he accomplished that I can remember was that he got the DMV in Indiana to be night and day difference. Like it went from a literal nightmare to just in and out. Most things you could be in and out in 5 minutes. And he did that 15, 20 years ago now, I guess. So yeah, no,
Wow.
never regretted voting for anyone. But again, wish I would have been voting at the local level. Wish I had understood the importance of that. So have you ever voted for anyone you
Yeah.
regret?
Yeah. Um, I think I guess I'm kind of the same. I mean, I do want to say that I absolutely hated having to vote for Hillary Clinton. Um, I guess the one thing that I regret
Please
is
explain that.
that wasn't a better alternative. Explain Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to hear that because while I don't regret it, it wasn't my first choice. That voting for
that's
her.
it. It was
Yeah.
definitely not my first choice. I think that she is just another corporate Democrat. I think that, um, like a lot of the other corporate Democrats, she's just a fake, phony ass politician. She does not actually care about working regular people. It's so performative. Like I just she gives me the ick. She just absolutely gives me the ick, and I understand why the vast majority of Americans also get the ick when they think of Hillary Clinton, because she just sucks, and I know that's gonna probably piss off some people to hear, but that's just how I feel. Um,
I got an old friend
Not
that
a
used
Hillary fan.
to. I understand. I do. And used to be friend. I can't say an old friend anymore because I don't really consider us to be friends. But taught me something when we were teenagers, and he always said, "Better pissed off than pissed on."
Yes. Amen. I love it. Um, yeah. So, yeah, as far as regret, like you said, I regret that there was not a better alternative. Um, and other than that, I guess I feel a little bit guilty for not voting for Barack Obama in 2012, but that's just how much he disappointed me with how he completely turned out to just be what I probably should have known he was going to be, which was another corporate Democrat, much like Hillary Clinton, who doesn't actually care about people. So sometimes I feel a little bit guilty for not voting for him. I don't know. I don't know why, really. I honestly don't, but I didn't vote for Barack Obama in 2012. I'm just going to put that out there. It's now on the record. Everybody knows I didn't vote for Barack Obama.
I don't think you would be alone in that. I voted for him both times. I think if anything, there's a larger conversation around that, but I think there's a literal machine, a machine that people, especially at that level of politics, get caught in. And in some ways, I mean, they're not even really that powerful where they can actually do everything that they may have even campaigned on. Um, I'll tell you, I watched more of Biden's presidency than I think I've watched anybody's presidency, other than maybe Trump's first term. Um, and watching, when you've got that thin of a margin in the House and the Senate, and you need everybody stepping to the same, marching beat. And we had two the entire time of Biden's presidency that were often voting with Republicans. Um, you know,
Hmm.
got an old friend or coworker that I used to work with in the pawn shop, and we once had a conversation. I said I would never, ever want to be president. You could not pay me enough to take on that position for any reason. And he was like, "Oh man, I'd love it. I'd love to have
Hmm.
that kind of power." And I was, it's just again, when you look at the gears around that position, I think it would be very difficult, especially in these times, or at least I'd say since the second Bush administration, to not just end up becoming corporate, whether you were Democrat or Republican, up until Trump's term.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so have you, let's see, what was the next question? Oh, here's a good one. Do you think cops should be abolished?
No, I don't think cops should be abolished. I think they should be allowed to go back to being the police that we originally wanted them to be. Now, with that being said, there's a caveat. I believe that the police have probably were originally put there to protect the wealthy. And I think that's where we're at again. I think there was probably a short time where they actually did protect and serve most of the community. I won't say all of the community out there, but abolished as a whole, no. I think there needs to be a great deal of reform. Um, I don't think the police should be handling mental illness issues. Um, I think that there were some laws that were passed not long ago where they were no longer held accountable for actions that they took, no matter what. And I think that has gotten us to where we are now. And then I watched a video. Oh man, it was making the rounds on SOL, or through SOL rather. Um, and they it was talking about Palantir and the technocrats that are out there trying to do their thing right now. and they said that they really believe that both the MAGA movement and the Thin Blue Line were a psyop. And I'm wholeheartedly on board with that. I believe that. I
Really?
don't. Yeah, yeah. I don't
So
think. Go
can
ahead.
you,
I'm
can you
sorry.
I was just gonna say, can you explain a little more about it being a psyop? Why is it a psyop? Like how?
Well, if you look at where we're headed, where we are, um, I mean, I'm no scholar, but I believe we're basically in a dictatorship, fascist regime at the moment. And the only way
Mhm.
not to be snatched up, not to, and we're what 7, 8 months in now. Imagine a year from now. If you disagree with anything that the man in that Oval Office wants done or says, you could absolutely be caught up by that thin blue line that you were screaming for. Um, and I've seen video after video of people who would normally, when you see a black person getting shot after doing everything they were told to do, you hear the same cliche of, um, they should have just complied. But then I've seen numerous videos of white people who didn't comply and didn't have the same result. And I've seen numerous videos of white people when they just were like, I'm not complying. And then it became tyrannical because it was pointed at them. But I think it's going to be along the same lines of those people who voted for him and have been had their rights taken away in one shape or form that they thought, hey, this isn't going to impact me because I voted for him. Well, this isn't going to impact me because I voted for him isn't going to help you down the road. And that thin blue line that you've supported the whole time was just a way to get you to allow them to militarize the police and give the police free reign. I
I
believe the
see.
American police force will
That
be
makes
the
sense.
I believe the American police force will be the next step of what ICE is currently becoming.
I see. Yeah, I agree with that. You know, I don't know. I kind of have two different thoughts about whether or not the police should be abolished. There's the flirting with anarchist side of me that says yes, because I think about you know places like Rojava and the Zapatista movements and these more bottom up democratic societies where there's direct democracy and there's just more individual control over how things go, and they seem to be making it work. And so there's that side of me which I know is probably never ever going to happen, not in my lifetime in this country. So if I put my wildest dreams aside and I try to stick with reality, I say ex- abolish, I guess, goes a bit far, but definite reform, like you said, and I mean extreme reform. Like I agree with you. I remember when Alton Sterling was shot and killed in Baton Rouge, and I just remember all the protests that resulted from that, and the pictures I remember seeing in like the local newspapers of like the cops confronting, like these lines of cops confronting all these protesters, and they were dressed like head to toe like freaking soldiers, man. Like they did not look like cops. They looked like soldiers ready to go to war. And our police force has been militarizing for what, a solid 2 decades now, and that is just absurd. It's absolutely uncalled for, and any, I guess, effort at reform to me definitely needs to focus on demilitarization. you know um like you said, it needs to go back to a protect and serve kind of model. But I don't know. My brain is in such a doomer place these days. Like, I just don't even think reform is possible. If I'm being real, like I just we have crossed the Rubicon. We are a totally militarized dictatorship at this point. And so it honestly just feels a little silly to think for a second that there's room for reform or that it would ever happen, at least anytime soon.
No,
So,
I
yeah,
understand that.
I don't even, I don't, I look at that question and I don't know. I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know. um, so have you, actually, let me skip that one. Would you live in a commune?
I'll be honest, I don't know enough to say yes or no. So based off of what I saw from, when you shared Rojava with me, that was my first experience into seeing anything about a commune that wasn't everything I've ever experienced with commune has always had a very negative uh, look upon it. Um, if it was something similar to Rojava, yeah, absolutely. But other than that, that's a tough one for me. I haven't seen enough that was good. It's all been bad or at least painted very negatively from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, not one I can really give a whole lot on there. What about you?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the word commune, like you said, comes with a lot of negative connotations. There's just been too many damn cults that have given it a bad name. Um, but I think if I could find the right one that didn't give me like culty vibes and, like values and principles, like we were all organizing around like the same thing and we believed passionately about that particular thing, I think I could. Convincing my family to come with me, that's a whole nother story. I don't know. But me personally, I could definitely, I think, do it so long as the conditions were, just right.
Question I said, would you rather reform our crumbling institutions or start anew?
Oh, start anew. Easy one.
Really?
In fact, well, here's the thing. And this is where I think, our conversations are going to get pretty interesting in the future is like, I believe firmly that there's just been so many different periods throughout human history where you've got these like major paradigm shifting events that just completely reshape and reshuffle populations, societies, countries, nations. And I feel like we're pretty much on the precipice of one right now. Um, and I think that there's so much major change on the horizon that while, yes, we are living in this very fascist, dystopian um, fall of our democracy right now, there is room for building something new, right? And so the real fight, I think, here is going to be, what ideas, principles, values will succeed um, in the majority, I guess you could say. And if we don't stop these tech bros, um, and probably even these Christian nationalists, we're looking at something pretty bleak, right?
Oh yeah.
But that's where we come in as the left, and we really seize this moment to try and do something different. You know what I mean? And it might sound silly to say, but hopefully this podcast can be just a small kernel of starting that, of getting people on board with going into the future and doing something new and different, but that still holds true to values of equality, justice, freedom, all those things that our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, all those things that it promised, right? Like keeping those values in mind and building something new. Um, does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. And like we'll get into far more detail about what that can look like over the course of the podcast, but But that's basically why I'm ready to just do something different.
All right.
How
With
about
that,
you?
I think something similar. I am at the point where I think reforming our current institutions, truly reforming them, is starting anew. I do not think there's any way to go back to what it was prior to the November of last year. And I'll be
Yeah.
honest, I'm okay with that. I think that it was only working for a small, very, very small segment of our society. So for it to like truly be reformed means to start brand new. You can't. I don't think you can save what was there. That's how we got where we're at now.
Right. And honestly, I think that is what sets me apart from a lot of the other folks we've come to know in our group. You hear a lot of like screaming and panicking about what's happening, and rightfully so. But I think for me, where people are panicking, wanting to save something that really wasn't working for us, versus seeing it as an opportunity to build something new, I think that's where I'm at. It's not it's I see it more of an opportunity and less of something we need to fight to save.
Yeah, I
So
get that. I get that.
yeah. All right. So on to our class discussion. With that, let's jump into our next segment, class discussion. John?
So, over the next few episodes, the book we'll be discussing is called White Trash: The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America by Nancy Isenberg. Nancy G. Isenberg, born 1958, is an American historian and professor of history at Louisiana State University. Excuse me. Her research interests include American political culture and legal and constitutional history in the U.S. She's authored numerous peer reviewed articles and books related to these topics. Synopsis: in this landmark book, Nancy Isenberg argues that the white working class voters who boosted Trump all the way to the White House have been a permanent part of American fabric, and reveals how the wretched and landless poor have existed from the time of the earliest British colonial settlements to today's hillbillies. Surveying political rhetoric and policy, popular literature, and scientific theories over 400 years, Eisenberg upends assumptions about America's supposedly class free society where liberty and hard work were meant to ensure real social mobility, and forces a nation to face the truth about the enduring I'm sorry, been a long day, malevolent nature of class.
Okay, so before we get started on this book, I'd like to ask listeners to consider the current Jeffrey Epstein scandal as we move along. Specifically, pay attention to what the scandal tells us about the ruling and elite class of today, how they live by an entirely different set of rules, how they escape accountability, how they prey upon the lower classes of society in any way they can, and how they treat us like we're dumb. It's clear that they see us, regular working people, as inferior, waste people, you might say. John, do you have any comments before we get started?
No, I mean, not really. Yeah, I think if people really, really consider what you just said, as we go into this, that, that's everything that needs to be said.
Awesome. Okay, so the way we'll do this is we're going to read passages from each part of the book that summarize our overall argument and that strike us in some way. Beginning with the introduction, Fables We Forget by Professor Eisenberg reminds us that the class conflict, which existed in America's early colonial days, is conveniently ignored or glossed over when discussing our political culture and history. About this, she writes,
By we know what class is, or do we think we do? Economic stratification created by wealth and privilege. The problem is that popular American history is most commonly told, dramatized, without much reference to the existence of social classes. It is as though, in separating from Great Britain, the United States somehow magically escaped the bonds of class and derived a higher consciousness of enriched possibility. In the terms of in the most literal terms, as we shall see, British colonists promoted a dual agenda. One involved reducing poverty back in England, and the other called for transporting the idle and unproductive to the New World. After settlement, colonial outposts exploited their unfree laborers, indentured servants, slaves, and children, and saw such expandable classes as human waste. By thinking of the lower classes is as incurable, irre- irreparable breeds, this study reframes the relationship of race and class. Class had its own singular and powerful dynamic. Apart from its intersection with race, it starts with the rich and potent meaning that came with the different names given the American underclass. Long before they were today's trailer trash and rednecks, they were called lubbers and rubbish, and clay eaters and crackers. And that's just scratching the surface. The idea of America as the world's best hope came much later.
And she goes on to write, class is the most outstanding, if routinely overlooked, element in presuppositions about early American settlement. Even now, the notion of a broad and supple middle class functions as a mighty balm, a smokescreen. We cling to the comfort of the middle class, forgetting that there can't be a middle class without a lower. It is only occasionally shaken up, as when the Occupy Wall Street movement of recent years shone an embarrassing light on the financial sector and the grotesque separation between the 1% and the 99%. And then the media giants find new crises and the nation's inherited disregard for class reboots as the subject recedes into the background again. By gaining first a better understanding of the colonial context and next charting the steps by which modern definitions of class were established, we will be able to see how ideas and ideals combined over time. By acknowledging the ongoing influence or older English definitions of poverty and class, we'll come to recognize that class identity was apparent in America, profoundly so, long before George Gallup saw it as a creature of public opinion. Indeed, class resonated long before waves of immigrants swept ashore in the 19th century and an awkward, often heated process of acculturation ensued. Above all, we must stop declaring what is patently untrue, that Americans, through some rare good fortune, escaped the burden of class that prevailed in the mother country of England. Far more than we choose to acknowledge, our relentless class system evolved out of recurring agrarian notions regarding the character and potential of the land, the value of labor, and critical concepts of breeding. Embarrassing lower class populations have always been numerous and have always been seen on the North American continent as waste people. And there we have the name of our podcast. Any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few, and we'll get into it more as we go through the book. But it just amazes me how much the history of our country has been whitewashed, how much it has uh, been just changed to make it look one way when it really hasn't been. And then on top of that, just how much history rhymes. And we're early in the book, um, but already I see cycles that have that have played out over and over and over again through the history of this country, playing out again today.
Yeah. For me, I got to say, this book is basically what I've been waiting for. You and I talked a little bit about the resentment I felt after leaving academia. I was at this place of like completely questioning where I stood on the political spectrum. I'd gone from being staunchly pro DEI and anti racist to thinking, wait a minute, something isn't right about this. When I say I was staunchly pro DEI and anti racist, I mean it was to the point of shaming my own family for being inherently racist simply because they're white. I found myself angry at them when it seemed to me that they weren't seeing or acknowledging the privilege of being white. And here's the part I'm most ashamed of. They often did verbally acknowledge their privilege, but it wasn't good enough for me. It didn't seem authentic to me. Looking back, I can remember thinking, ugh, if only they were educated, they'd really get it. Like I low key judged them for not being educated. And so let's zoom out for a second. Higher education in this country costs a lot of money. Only a small percentage of the population even gets to go to college, never mind the amount of debt it takes if mom and dad can't help out. So essentially, being educated is a privilege in itself. Shouldn't I be more angry that the class circumstance of my family didn't allow for them to be educated? Do you see what I'm saying? While I'm forever grateful of the higher education I received, I can't disregard that it's a giant indicator of class privilege. So, yeah, I'm really grateful for this book. It's been a huge part of helping me deconstruct the identitarian politics that I've been swimming in for so long. All right. So that brings us to part one, chapter one, taking out the trash, waste people in the new world. In this chapter, Isenberg identifies the aristocratic men responsible for finding people to settle the new world. She describes how they viewed the new land and the types of people most suited to develop it. She writes,
It was not just land that could be waste, people could be waste too. And this brings us to our most important point of embarkation.
Hacklet.
Hacklet, thank you. Hacklet's America required what he classified as waste people. The core of laborers needed to cut down the trees, beat the hemp for making rope, gather honey, salt, and dry fish, dress raw animals' hides, dig the earth for minerals, raise olives and silk, and sort the pack bird feathers. He pictured paupers, vagabonds, convicts, debtors, and lusty young men without employment doing all such work. The fry, young children, of wandering beggars that grow up idly and hurtfully and burdenous to the realm might be unladen and better bred up. Merchants would be sent to trade with the Indians, selling trinkets, vending cloth goods, and gathering more information about the interior of the continent. Artisans were needed, millwrights to process the timber, carpenters, brickmakers, and plasterers to build the settlements, cooks, launderers, bakers, tailors, and cobblers to service the infant colony. Where would these workers come from? The artisans, he felt, could be spared without weakening the English economy, but the bulk of the labor force was to come from the swelling numbers of poor and homeless. They were, in Hacklett's disturbing illusion, ready to eat up one another. Already cannibalizing the British economy, idle and unused, they were waiting to be transplanted to the American land to be better, albeit no more humanely, put to use. In this sense, what Hacklett foresaw in colonized America was one giant workhouse. This cannot be emphasized enough. As the waste firm of America was settled, it would become a place where the surplus poor, the waste people of England, could be converted into economic assets. The land and the poor could be harvested together to add to, rather than to continue to subtract from, the nation's wealth.
In light of the rollback of women's reproductive rights, the Epstein scandal, and the horrifying tradwife trend circulating on social media, I thought it important to include Eisenberg's findings on the status of women in early colonial America. She writes, all that was required of women was that they marry. Their prospective husbands were expected to buy them, that is, to defray the cost of passage and provisions. Each woman was valued at 150 pounds of tobacco, which was the same price exacted from Jane Dickinson when she eventually purchased her freedom. Not surprisingly, then, with their value calculated in tobacco, women in Virginia were treated as fertile commodities. They came with testimonials to their moral character, impressing on industrious planters that they were not being sold a bad bill of goods. One particular planter wrote that an earlier shipment of females as corrupt, and he expected a new crop that was guaranteed healthy and favorably disposed for breeding. Accompanying the female cargo were some 200 head of cattle, a reminder that the Virginia husbandman needed both species of breeding stock to recover his English roots. Breeding had a place in more than one market. In Virginia and elsewhere, in the Chesapeake region in the early 17th century, a gender imbalance of 6-1 among indentured servants gave women arriving from England an edge in the marriage exchange. Writing of Maryland in 1660, former indentured servant George Alsop claimed that the women just off the boat found a host of men fighting for their attention. Females could pick and choose. Even servants had a shot at marrying a well-heeled planter. Alsop called such unions copulative marriage, through which women sold their breeding capacity to wealthy husbands. In language that was decidedly uninhibited, he wrote that women went to, quote, market with their virginity, end quote. Another promoter, writing about Carolina, went so far as to say that a woman could find a husband in America no matter what she looked like. If, newly arrived, she appeared civil and was under 50 years of age, some men would purchase her for his wife. Yeah, it's just so incredibly cruel and messed up. And while reading this, I remember thinking about Trump and all the oligarchs surrounding him as I read this. The whole Epstein thing is such a perfect illustration of how today's aristocrats still view and treat regular people like waste people. I mean, look at the total disdain and disregard for the victims, most of whom were preyed upon because they were poor and vulnerable. I mean, look at the language he uses. When explaining to the press why he and Epstein broke up, he uses words like stole and take as if these girls were property. Quote, he stole my people, he took my people. The gall of this man is absolutely incredible. He literally can't help himself, and when the opportunity arises for him to flaunt his power and privilege, he does. You can see it when reporters ask him if he plans to pardon Ghislaine. He continues to repeat the line, I'm allowed to, but I haven't thought about it. I'm allowed to, though. He never wants people to forget that he holds all the power over us waste people.
Yeah, I mean, it blows me away. There's so much on, that opening chapter, the opening part of that first chapter. The fact that not only were people, all people that were poor, um, such a negative stain, if you will, on the British colonies or, the British economy in Britain, but then, ultimately the same when they got to the colonies. And the way that they viewed women as commodities, um, yeah, that blows me away. And but the crazy part is when I look at social media and just the news headlines, the way that uh, those on the right, especially, seem to um, the way they seem to perceive women as a vessel, basically, not having, they've just stripped them of their rights to an abortion, to health care, forcing a dead woman to carry child until birth, which is now going to cost that family both the bill for the keeping the dead body on enough life support to act as an incubator, and now that child is gonna doesn't isn't going to, but has severe health issues. You look at what she's talking about in this book, the things that were going on at that time, and you look at where we are now and where it seems like we're headed. And again, the cycles are just absolutely repeating. And it's horrifying to think that over 400 years, we've really not come that far.
I totally agree. It's so depressing. Um, but anyway, moving on.
Yeah, so chapter 2, John Locke's Loverland, the settlement of Carolina and Georgia. Here, Isenberg traces the class history of early settlements in the Carolinas and Georgia by turning to the writings of John Locke, in particular his work called Fundamental Constitutions.
Okay, so though John Locke never set foot on American soil, he was given the concocted title of Landgrave, and 48,000 acres of Carolina land was conferred on him for his services. With his intimate knowledge of the colony and his wide reading on the New World generally, Locke undoubtedly had a decisive hand in drafting the inherently illiberal fundamental constitutions. The fundamental constitutions did more than endorse slavery. It was a manifesto promoting a semi feudalistic and wholly aristocratic society. Much ink was spilled in devising a colonial kingdom that conferred favor upon titled elites and manor lords. It was on the basis of a fixed class hierarchy that the precious commodity of land was allocated. Each new county was divided into sections. One fifth of the land was automatically reserved for proprietors, another fifth for the colonial nobility, and three fifths for untitled manor lords and freeholders. The fundamental constitutions was really a declaration of war against poor settlers. Poor Virginians threatened to drag down the entire colony. Shaftesbury, too, believed that everything should be done to discourage, quote, lazy or debauched men and their families from settling in Carolina. The proprietors the proprietors definitely did not want a colony overrun with former indentured servants. They did not want Virginia's refuse. In their grand scheme, Leetmen were intended to take the place of those who lived off the land without contributing to the coffers of the ruling elite. Serfs, in short, were better than those, quote, lazy lubbers, meaning stupid, clumsy oafs, the word that came to describe the vagrant poor of Carolina.
Locke's invention of the leap men explains a lot. It enables us to piece together the curious history of North Carolina, to demonstrate why this colony lies at the heart of our white trash story. The difficult terrain that spanned the border with Virginia, plus the high numbers of poor squatters and inherently unstable government, eventually led Carolina to be divided into two colonies in 1712. South Carolinians adopted all the features of a traditional class hierarchy, fully embracing the institution of slavery, just as Locke did in the fundamental constitutions. The planter and the merchant classes of South Carolina formed a highly incestuous community. Wealth, slaves, and land were monopolized by a small ruling coterie. This self satisfied oligarchy were the true inheritors of the old landgraves, carrying on the dynastic impulses of those who would create a pseudo nobility of powerful families. By 1700, we should note slaves comprised half the population of the southern portion of the Carolina colony, an imbalance that widened to 72% by 1740. Beginning in 1714, a series of laws required that for every six slaves an owner purchased, he had to acquire one white servant, lamenting that the white populations do not proportionally multiply. South Carolina lawmakers had one more reason to wish that a corps of elite men and women had actually been formed. Encouraged to marry and multiply, tied to the land, they might have pervaded a racial and class barrier between the slaves and the landed elites.
I personally found that last line most interesting. It's the moment where the aristocrats realize they can weaponize race to insulate themselves and cement their status at the top of the class hierarchy. It, for me, brought to mind a scholar that I recently discovered named Teray Reed. He argues that race doesn't exist independently of class. The concept of race was an invention of the elites, a social construct necessary to rectify the contradiction that they were espousing liberal values of equality while also presiding over the institution of slavery. I hope I'm not misrepresenting him, but that's basically what I understood from his arguments. John, any thoughts on that or on
Yeah,
the
no,
passage?
I love that. As far as the passage goes, I would agree with you. The last line, I mean, was just the fact that they needed to create a barrier of poor white trash, lubbards, um, to create a barrier between them and the enslaved black people just blows my mind. I mean, it makes me think of the South Park movie, where they used black people as a barrier, as a human shield, if you will. But yeah, no, it's crazy, right? I agree with that. That race is absolutely. a construct. It reminds me of a video I saw not long ago where a guy was out doing interviews and he asked, "Hey, what's the worst race?" And the guy who was interviewing was like, "I don't believe in race. Race is a construct. We're all shades of wheat." And then they made it, the guy that was interviewing made a joke about the fact that, yeah, I was actually just talking about like 100, 300, 500 meter races. And they laughed about it. But when you really stop and think about that, race, I don't believe race is real anymore. I'm so glad to see that you said that or hear that you said that. Um, because I've been thinking about that a lot over the last probably 6 months. Um, that it really is a construct. Now, I believe cultures are real, and but cultures aren't necessarily dependent upon skin color. Um, but race is just a tool that has been used again to keep us separated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot when I think about, what I was saying earlier, where I spent a lot of time just, I guess some people might call it white guilt or whatever, just like totally lamenting the fact that I was white. I hated that I was white. I felt so much shame and all this other stuff. And, it was a pretty horrible time in my life because I know that I cared so much. Like, okay, let me back up just a second. So at the time, I was doing a lot of work at my job around like DEI and diversity and that sort of thing, and really just pushing those initiatives, and in the process, like I just found myself constantly feeling guilty for being white. There were even times when I felt like I could not put forward an idea or an opinion because it wasn't my place, because I'm white. And therefore, I already have this privilege. And so I should just sit down and shut up and let others lead, right? That was really the culture that I was in academia. And for a while, you know, it worked, or like I was okay. But then as time went on, like the more I just realized, like, first of all, I can't help that I'm white. I didn't ask to be white. And when I think about my personal background and my family and where they come from, we are absolutely like waste people, according to this book. Like I come from a long line of sharecroppers. I'm sure if you go back far enough in my family tree, you may find a plantation owner. um, but again, I didn't ask for that. Like, and I am doing my best today to right the wrongs of the past in all the ways that I know how. But ultimately, I've just come to the realization that from a strategy point of view, like a political strategy, you're never going to win people over by telling them or making them feel like crap for who they are. You know what I mean? And so I've basically just kind of ended up in a place where I know my heart. I know that I care, and I want equality. I want justice. I want all of those things, and I'll do whatever I can to achieve that. Um, but I'm also tired. Like I'm not gonna feel guilty anymore about where I come from and that sort of thing. I don't know. I'm sure people might hear that and they might bristle a little bit, but I just that's just where I'm at. I think that there are far more productive, strategic ways to accomplish a more equal world than to just totally demonize, poor white people. Um, anyway, that's all I'll say about that for now.
I cannot wait to have further discussions about that. And my last point on that is that I hate that you have ever felt or been made to feel in any kind of way guilty about being white because I never have. I had someone try to throw that in my face back in 2015, I think it was 2016. There were these protests in St. Louis, and there was conversation on going back to Facebook about that, and that was the first time someone had ever brought up white guilt. I literally didn't. I'd never heard the term before. And I thought about it. I'm like, no, I don't have white guilt. I do have a desire because of the people that I've come to know in my throughout my life and the friends I've made. I've had a desire to work to never allow history to repeat itself. Um, but no, I never I have never felt responsible for the past that I wasn't a part of. I did again feel responsible to try to, in some way, shape, or form, help make sure the past never got repeated.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I think we're headed to some pretty vulnerable places as we go forward in this podcast, because I definitely could share more on that particular subject, but for the sake of time, we'll move forward. Okay, so lifestyles of the looting class, and basically that's why we can't have nice things. That's our next segment. And today we're going to be spotlighting what who John so aptly named Cold Plastic Face, Peter Thiel. That was who you were talking about, right? I just want to
Um,
make sure.
what's crazy is it absolutely fits. But when I originally thought about that, no, that was in the mid '90s, about the same time that I had discovered our favorite one of our favorite bands. Some of the
Oh my
guys that was
gosh,
yeah,
really?
yeah, some of the guys I was hanging out with at the time went up to Jackson, Tennessee to check out a band, and I forget if it was the name of the a name of the band that was very similar to that, but something happened at that show, and I was like, "Cold Plastic Face," and it's all about this need, this um, excuse me, this commercialized, industrialized, so-called beauty. But yeah, no, I
Mm.
mean Peter Thiel absolutely fits, but not who I originally was thinking of when I thought about that.
Oh, well, I'll be darned. You must be a psychic or something and knew that just someday that the, living, breathing, walking, actual cold plastic face would enter the scene. Um, so anyway, okay, cold plastic face Peter Thiel. He is a venture capitalist, co-founder of PayPal, Palantir Technologies, and a VC fund called Founders Fund. Um, his net worth is $20.8 billion, making him the 103rd richest individual in the world, and who also gave JD Vance $15 million for his Senate campaign. Um, John, would you like to read some more about our friend Mr. Peter Thiel here?
Sure. Let's see. The biggest threat would be Palantir Technologies. If you don't know about Palantir Technologies, I absolutely suggest you do a little more research than what we're getting ready to tell you. But from the Guardian's recently published article called Peter Thiel's Palantir poses a grave threat to Americans by Robert Wright. Palantir sells an AI based platform that allows its users, among them military and law enforcement agencies, to analyze personal data, including social media profiles, personal information, and physical characteristics. These are used to identify and surveil individuals. In March, Trump signed an executive order requiring all agencies and departments of the federal government to share data on Americans. To get the job done, Trump chose Palantir Technologies. Representative Warren Davidson, a Republican of Ohio, told Semaphore such work could be dangerous. When you start combining all those data points on an individual into one database, it really essentially creates a digital ID. And it's a power that history says will eventually be abused. Palantir's tools have already been implicated in mass surveillance, predictive policing, and immigration raids. Founders Fund, venture capital fund. General themes and controversial founders fund investments. Militarization of AI and robotics. God, I've got so many movies that are coming to mind. Expansion of
Me too.
surveillance infrastructure. Techno libertarian escape from government regulation. Support for companies operating in legal ethical gray areas. Funding of life extension and transhumanist experiments.
Okay. Um, while that is frightening enough, let's just talk about some of his authoritarian sympathies. Thiel has openly expressed disdain for democracy, once writing that, quote, I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible, end quote. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how much he hates democracy. His ideological project often leans towards technocratic elitism, which is ruled by a wealthy, highly educated elite insulated from public accountability. His advocacy for AI militarization and private defense contracts is accelerating the fusion of big tech with the national security state. And lastly, he's got some dark money and political influences going on with tens of millions funneled into super PACs, called some of which are called Free Forever, Protect Ohio Valley Values, and those are to shape Senate races and promote anti-establishment nationalists. His political contributions often bypass traditional accountability mechanisms, giving him outsized influence on candidate platforms and strategy. And he has supported candidates with extreme views on women, LGBTQ rights, and immigration, helping normalize radical politics through elite funding. And guys, this is just, like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This man is truly evil incarnate. I highly recommend that people go and read Gil Duran's work on Peter Thiel. You can find a lot of his writings on his newsletter called The Nerd Reich. He also does a podcast too, which is pretty cool. I love listening to his podcast. Anyway, so that's all we have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed what we presented and got you thinking. And I highly encourage you guys to check out Nancy Isenberg's book. I don't think you won't be disappointed. Um, and then, John,
We'll be back
anything
in.
you want to say as we close out?
No, I think we've covered a lot. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode where we will continue our survey of Nancy Eisenberg's book, White Trash, and expose another oligarch's obscene wealth and malevolent intentions.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Till next time.